Okay, demineralization prevention, you want to try to keep the soil with its minerals intact. One of the ways that that is accomplished is by planting different crops. We call that polyculture. Diverse will work for there, so I'll give you the point for that. But polyculture. And so that, of course, means a variety. It means diverse, different types of crops and plants. The reason being is that different plants take different minerals from the soil. So one of the things we'll learn is that even though a lot of times you have certain minerals that are always there because they're a common part of biological systems, sometimes there's very specific needs for a particular type of mineral, and therefore a plant that needs that mineral can deplete it very quickly. One example of this is citrus fruit and manganese. Okay? Manganese is not something you think of as a common mineral, but it is a necessary component in certain types of proteins. And citrus fruit need it. And where they originated from, in the Andes, it's a pretty common mineral in the soil. When they started to try to grow them, they had to figure out that it needed that particular mineral before the citrus industry was able to be planted in other places besides South America. But that's an example of that one particular crop can remove a trace mineral out of the soil and therefore make it so that that crop won't grow well anymore. So you want to plant a variety of different things. And similar to that, you also, if it's either a lot of different plants in one area, or in one area you will plant different things each year. They call that crop rotation. Okay, and one of the strategies that is important to follow, or that helps at least in crop rotation, is if you plant legumes at some point in time. Legumes, primarily they're beans. Okay. But one of the properties about legumes that makes them special is that they tend to mutualize. They form a relationship with bacteria, and which the bacteria actually grow in their roots. And these particular bacteria can make nitrogen fertilizer from the nitrogen in the air. Now, as I mentioned before, the nitrogen cycle is very complex. This is one part of it. We're going to talk about that more in detail later. But suffice it to say, in this case, it helps to add nitrogen to the soil, these leguminous-type plants. Rice, I'm afraid, is not a type of legume. There's a number of different ones. As I mentioned, beans are on that particular list. That's why we've got soybeans here. Alfalfa is as well. Peanuts are legumes. They're neither a pea nor a nut, but they are legumes. So that helps as well. Organic fertilizer. So if you remember, I talked about how chemical fertilizers, although they're very helpful in modern agriculture, they also are very soluble and they can be washed out of the soil very easily. Organic fertilizer, on the other hand, not only does it decompose slower and therefore release its minerals slower, it also has it can retain water. It's spongy. That kind of humus and everything in the soil, like particularly something like peat moss, retains the water, and therefore that helps to reduce the water from running off and taking the soil with it. Okay. Acid deposition. Oh, group 1. We just did air pollution. Well, okay, I get it. I get that. But that's, if you remember, that's kind of a specific one. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and I'll ask you about this. Group 1. How will nitrogen contribute to acid deposition or acid precipitation? 20 words or less.
20 words or less.
And 5 seconds or less.
It's going to be absorbed into the clouds and then form an acid-like substance.
Do you remember what the nitrogen type compound is that gets absorbed in the clouds?
NOx.
That is good. Good enough. I will give that to you. Okay. Very good, group 1. All right. So, but that is part of the acid rain, yes. But you may remember that I said that a lot of that, the nitrogen, doesn't really come from the fuel as much as it comes from that combustion. But that's okay. The main thing, the main culprit, the main problem when it comes to acid rain is sulfur. Sulfur is the one that has the most component, and it's the one that is actually more in the fuel, whereas a lot of the nitrogen oxides that are formed are from the high temperature of the nitrogen and the oxygen in the atmosphere reacting with each other. Okay. So limiting that burning of things that contain sulfur, primarily coal. Okay, coal is the one that's usually the big problem there. Adding since we're trying to control an acid, what type of chemical will we use to control an acid?
Science.
Base. Add a basic chemical, because it's all about that. And same again, once again, using low pressure irrigation. No, I'm sorry. That's not what we want to see there.
Sure.
Okay. In order for once the soil is acidified, that means the minerals are more soluble. But if you don't have a lot of water, also to wash those minerals out, it's not as much of a problem. So if you can reduce that amount of water, generally in conserving water, you're going to not only conserve the soil physically, but you can conserve the chemicals that are in there as well. Okay? All right, let me count up points.